with Ricardo Legorreta, who is with us this week from Mexico City, and who was really our wonderful coordinator of this whole series, for which I thank you very much. It made such a difference having you put it together at your end, and it made it certainly more meaningful.
It's not easy to coordinate Mexicans, and
yeah,
especially with our architects. You're in trouble.
Yes, but you did a very good job, and we've been enjoying the series very much.
I'm very pleased about it.
You were a product of the National School of Architecture, weren't you?
Yes.
Was it the new school?
No, as a matter of fact, it was 2 years after I finished the university. The city was open.
So you were still going in Centro?
I was still on the good atmosphere. I believe much more and I think it's one of the things that helped me much more is that we made all our studies really as part of the society and not as a group which lives in the campus and doesn't care about what's going on in the city. And there we were in the middle of the city, so we used to have lunch and fun and everything right downtown. And I think one of the things that has hurt downtown Mexico is that the university went out. So
that's very interesting.
If you ask me, I will go back to the concept of having the students as part of the city, more than in a campus, completely independent. Even the installations and conditions were extremely bad. I think we had the opportunity of living with the country.
That's a very interesting concept. I guess it's part of the overall idea of planning for the urban center and being a part of that vitality of the city.
Yes,
but I've never heard anyone express it in just that way. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you think you're improving everything, and then it doesn't always work out. That was one of those perfect schemes.
Exactly. I feel that the intervention of architects and planners in the development of a city or in the development of a society can be very dangerous, because we think that we can teach people to live, and it's completely the opposite. I think we should learn how everybody lives instead of trying to impose certain things that sound very interesting and very shocking from the point of view of planning. Well, we were talking before about Le Corbusier, and I think that if he ever had the opportunity of building that city, we would be regretting.
Pobre Paris.
Yes, exactly.
While you were in school, were you already working?
Yes. Well, first I started working when I was in you have first grades, then you go to high school, and then you go to college. I started working in college since I was 16 years old. I started working
in architecture.
In architecture.
Really?
Yes.
In an office?
In an office.
Was it José Villagrán?
I worked for a year with other architects, and then after that I worked with Villagrán when I went to school.
Oh, that's a wonderful place to have
started. And I think it has been one of the most good experience in my life is to work with since I was very young. I think it's very good to see the theory and practice together and at the same time. I think it's very helpful.
Yes,
very helpful.
That's why when we set up SCI-Arc, we made it a 3-day program and encouraged our students to work.
As a matter of fact, there's something that intrigues me very much. I want to use that word because I don't know if it's the right idea. I would like to experiment it, which is to go back a little bit to that concept of the professor and the students but being together in the everyday life. In Mexico, that in certain type of activity is very common. We always tease Mexicans saying that we can't do anything without a helper. So if you take your car to the garage, the mechanic will always have a helper. That maybe he only passes the screwdriver or whatever it is. But through that, this boy who starts to learn the activity and the profession. So I offered that to the university a few years ago, and they didn't accept it. But I offered them to why they didn't send some students to my office, that they could live right next to me or to my associates, and by that they could receive credit. It wasn't accepted, but I doubt. I would like to experiment that, because I really feel that the possibility of working when you are a student is very good.
Yes, well, it's a wonderful idea.
Of course, it was my experience, and it's partial my point of view. But
yes. Was it unusual that you were able to work as a young man?
No, it was quite common.
It was.
Common. For example, one thing I never did is to go out of Mexico to study. And it's not because I didn't want to. I've received the right advice from Walter Gropius. He was in Mexico, and I had the opportunity of asking him. And the answer was very beautiful, and I followed up all the way. He said to me, "Where do you plan to live and work?" I said, "In Mexico." So he said, "Well, then stay there and travel as much as you can." He said, that's what I did. So I never studied outside of Mexico. So it's interesting that what could be the best. The other day I was discussing that with a friend of mine. He's an economist, and he sustains that somebody should, if a Mexican wanted to study architecture, he should go outside. And I sustain that that he should study in Mexico and then travel and see, but study with in another way. So as I say, it only intrigues me. I'm not sure about the possibility.
Well, it's a strong argument because it worked very well for you.
Well,
obviously.
So it is that way. And I think that the other advantage of starting to work young, very young, is that you get really involved in architecture. So you start to become an architect all day around. I think it is very important not to have the concept that you are an architect during the school hours or during the working hours. And if you start young, then you really, as a matter of fact, you become a very special person. There is a witness here, which is my wife. I'm sure she's bored about hearing architecture all day, but that's the way it happens. I remember when I used to visit her, when we were dating, that I always took with me sketches and things that I wanted to show to her, because it was part of my life. There's no line in between. And that helps by starting young.
I think the marriages that last in architecture are the ones in which the wife understands that architecture is really a way of life. It's not like having a husband who is involved with other professions.
It's no doubt that architects' wives, they deserve a monument. It's always a problem to be an architect's wife.
How do you look back on those years with Villagrán in the office as part of your formative experience?
Without any doubt, extremely definite. Various reasons. First, I think it's one of the few persons I have met that really have a sense of professionalism, of being honest, of the ethics of the profession. And the other thing, which maybe in the States is not so clear and so important, which is the discipline and the sense of responsibility with your own work. In a country like Mexico, you can play a little bit with romanticism, and under the flag of romanticism, you can become irresponsible, which is not the same thing. And Villagrán teach us, to everybody who worked with him, that sense of responsibility, of professionalism, and of ethics. And now I find out that for me has been extremely valuable, especially right now when all this chaos of what is an architect is happening. I always remember his very straight and very clear position on it. So for me it was definitive on that. More on that field than on the, what we could say, the creative part, that I really started when I left his office to create my own things. Because when I was with him, I was very much in activity of developing all the projects, etc. And but in that field, he really influenced me very much.
You went from apprentice to partner over the years.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, I entered in a very nice way, because he used to be, how to say, when you are in the same school, when two persons are at the same school, how do you call them?
Classmates?
Classmates. My father and Villagrán. But I went and I started working with Villagrán without him knowing my name, not even my name. Until after 6 months I was a draftsman. He asked my name, and then he said, how come you didn't mention it? And I said it was intentional.
Yeah.
So I went all the way from the draftsman to become partners. And until I tried to organize a group of young architects under his overall direction. It couldn't happen by other reasons, so I left the office. But I stayed with him, what, about close to 12 years.
So those were really important years.
Yes, very important years.
And then you began your own practice
My
at
own
that
practice.
time.
And 2 years after, it happened a very important thing to me also, which has nothing to do with architecture. I left Villagrán, and I started my own practice. And of course, I didn't have work at all. I just have a very small job. And I was close to have my first important job. And it happened to be that it was a company who had interviewed Villagrán a year ago for a building. And I was the only one who speak, or at least try to speak English in the office. So I deal with them, etc. When they came back a year later, they looked for me. So I called Villagrán, and he insisted that I should get the job instead of him. So when I was ready to go to New York for the first interview and start working, I got very, very ill. So it was, I almost died. And I felt when I was dying, it was, I think it's an experience that if you are able to survive it, is one of the best experiences you can have in life. And so I felt that I was dying. I make an analysis on my life, and that changed completely my point of view. I appreciate much more the human relations, friendship, health, a lot of things, and that changed very radically my philosophy of life, and of course my philosophy in architecture. So that was another of my great influence in life, which it's incredible because close to about 10 years after, the same situation, not the same illness, but the same situation happened to my wife. So we have played with that both sides, and it has been a very important thing for our life to have that possibility of looking at your life as it already passed, and to make an analysis, which if you are healthy, you are not able to do it. So I could say that that was another of the very important things in my life, to be able to see it from as if that was all over. So that happened about 15 years ago. So the reaction to really try to do something good, or at least if it was in my hands, was very strong.
What were other influences that shaped you in those early years?
Very strong influences. I think those are I'd say, direct influences. The other very strong influence we could say is that through my father, through my family, through my life, I have always was teached to my interest in Mexico, always. My father is what I could say the opposite of an architect, at least officially. He's a banker. So, but of course, my point of view is very partial, because he's the very special kind of banker. He's a human banker, which they do not exist very much.
We should have more like that.
So he has been all his life has been interested in Mexico. Always. He has been trying to have things manufactured in Mexico, things done in Mexico, finding a way of solving the problems on the Mexican way. and trying to use the benefit of other countries and other technology, but always in the benefit of Mexico. So through that way of life, then through my wife's family, which also has been always very interested in Mexico, all that, for me, is very natural to keep always looking in Mexico and trying to look for it and what's going on. And because of that, of course, I have found several influences, but basically all of them under the same theme. The strongest directly to my work has been, of course, through the Chucho Reyes, the painter. Is not very well known, but I think is one of the persons that really felt Mexico more deeply, in the sense of not only he's very well known because of the use of color, but he went much farther than that. I think is the use of color, the sense of humor that he had, the way he was always teasing people about how easy it was to make art and how you can really create environments. I always remember, for example, how he used to tease Luis Barragán, and he used to tell him, look, it's very easy to do your environments. Come tomorrow and you will see this room as the way you will do it. And he used to do that, and he created an environment exactly the same as the one from Barragán.
Yes.
So Chucho Reyes, of course, Barragán has been an influence. Barragán more than an influence on the architecture itself. I think on the way he as a person, more than as an architect, has been an influence for me. He's a person who has an extraordinary sensibility. And then the thing directly that has influenced me more than even Chucho and Barragán has been the vernacular architecture, which is part of the thing I would like to talk today. It's, for me, is the most a strong influence, and it still is. Every time we have an opportunity, we go to a small town, we travel around the country and see all these things, which is a continuous lessons of architecture. And then through that vernacular architecture, the last important influence I can talk of is a trip I did to Morroco, which I think was unbelievable. I think has been one of the most impressive. It was for a year of studies.
When was that?
This was in 67. Yes, 67. Just before at the middle of the design of the Camino Real. When I was beginning to design the Camino Real, I went to Morroco, and it was unbelievable. Yes. So those are basically, if you want to have a resume of influences, I could classify that way.
Well, I think that's very interesting, because these are the things that shape us and help, I think, a designer interpret his or her world.
I don't believe in somebody who says that doesn't have any influences. And I don't believe in somebody that says that he doesn't copy. I think that the people who is not receptive to influences and is not ready to copy, he will learn very much less than the people who are ready for it. So I don't see anything wrong in copying, as far as you do a good thing about it. That's the important thing.
Do you feel that you were influenced by Barragán in the use of color and texture?
Well, I think I could answer that a little more of saying that we are both influenced by Mexico. I think that if you don't think in color, you're not Mexican. I always say that the black and white movies and black and white television shouldn't exist in Mexico. For us, color is part of our life. As I was saying, I cannot think of a wall, I cannot think of a floor or of a building without thinking the color at the same time. I can tell you one story about that is, I was shocked when we were working for this project here in Los Angeles for Bunker Hill, that the color study was separated from architecture. For me, it was completely incredible. I cannot think that way. So,
because you're used to working in an integrated way.
Yes, so I can tell you that the influence comes from all the environment of Mexico. Any place you go, you see color. So it's the influence, of course, there's a certain influence from Barragán. He has worked very sophisticated way with the color, but basically the color comes from Mexico, more than other things. That's why he was talking about
for him,
Chucho.
for him too.
For him and for everybody.
Yes, well, that's something you have that we don't have, is that cultural background that's so available and so direct. But I have said about you that what Barragán began in the small studies, in the gardens, in the walls, you are now able to continue that exploration in the larger projects, which I find fascinating.
Well, yes, the idea is that I'm trying to experiment and to use those things in the everyday life, and not only in one small space, which is very special for certain things. I think that it's completely different to do a place for one person or a group of persons that try to really work with a space which is practically public, such as a hotel or an office building. Because it's not only the point of view of getting involved in all the technical problems of architecture, is that you're doing something for everybody, which is it's a little more difficult. And I always complain and I always regret that he didn't get involved in that kind of work. He's too selective from my point of view.
Well, when we were with him, he spoke of the office building in Monterrey. Will that be a larger project
yes,
for him?
I think it's the first one he's
That's
getting
what
involved
I was thinking,
So
as the first opportunity.
I'm very interested to see what comes out of it.
That is going ahead.
It seems so, is what he told
Wonderful,
me. That is going ahead.
In terms of the various building types, and you have touched many, what do you find the most satisfying?
All of them. I think is one of the.
That's great.
I think is one of the great things you can have as a Mexican, as an architect in Mexico, is that you are able to work in various type of buildings continuously, and that gives you all kind of points of view. So I always try to have all that variety. I can tell you that, for example, I'm always doing a house, always, only one. But I'm always doing a house.
You find that satisfying in a special way?
And then people sometimes they say that, for example, to do a factory is rather boring. I find it very exciting. So I don't see any difference. I can tell you that the most important thing for me is the type of people you're going to build, which they are always interesting people. The users of the buildings, they are always interesting. What can spoil the building is either the owner or the architect. So what I'm worried about is what kind of owner I'm going to work with. And that I'm very careful that we have the kind of communication to really work with. If that communication exists, I enjoy any kind of building. It's very interesting. One building I haven't done, which I would like very much to do, is a church. I haven't done anything about that, and I would like very much to do something really very connected with the spiritual feelings. Church, a monastery, something like that would be great.
Well, I hope that opportunity is forthcoming.
We'll see if it happens.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that looking over your work, the characteristics that seem to emerge are the things that you've talked about: the use of color, the use of texture, the relationship to your cultural heritage, that makes you particularly a Mexican architect.
Yes.
And yet you have, your work, I think, has a universal appeal. And that's what makes it so interesting to us.
I will add one thing to what you have mentioned. I don't know if I have achieved or not, but it's one of the main goals is to try to design, but very, very honestly, I think that we architects are very demagogic on our positions. Here I'm talking truly about it, to be able and try to design for the human being and not for the rest of the architects. I think right now architects, we design either for the rest of the architects or for the photographers. And we always forget about designing for the people who are going to be in the building and the users. So that's one thing I would like. If I were able to make people happy when they are in my buildings, then I'm very glad. about it. That would be the happiest thing that can happen to me. The people who use the building are happy. That will be the best.
Well, that's the best.
That would be the best
goal of all.
Sure.
Of all. The one thing we haven't touched on is the pre-Hispanic influence. Do you feel that strongly?
Not exactly in shapes. Sometimes they say that I do incline walls because they remain the pyramids. It's not true. Not directly in shapes and that sort of thing, but in way of being and in certain things, yes. Yes, it's no doubt. We cannot deny our own blood, and I think we are half Indians, half Spaniards, and I don't know what percentage. I suppose I'm very high in Arab blood because I feel very close to.
That's why you enjoyed Morocco.
To Morocco. So, but it's no doubt that the pre-Columbian influence is very strong. It's no doubt. It's difficult to say about shapes because there are very few shapes to play with, but it's no doubt that there's an influence on the huge spaces and
the open spaces, like in the Camino.
And those things which are even stark. We like to frighten people with our spaces. That's an influence of pre-Hispanic architecture.
Well, as I said, this is something that you have by your birthright. That
sure. Yes.
It's a wonderful thing to relate to.
Yes.
And has a universal
and
appeal.
Creates conflicts sometimes
Yes.
with the influence of Spain. There are certain things which are opposed on that, and that's what makes Mexican so complicated, because we are very complicated. We say we are very simple, but it's not true. We're extremely complicated.
That's a good note to end on, I think.
Yeah. Very well.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Ricardo.
you.
It's been a pleasure having you here and talking with you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.